Welcome back, guys, and today we are going to learn about ASP.NET Core Web API. So what is an API? So most of you guys have been asking, we dive into web APIs. So what is an ASP.NET Web API? So API in full stands for Application Program Interface. And ASP.NET Web API is actually a framework provided by Microsoft, which makes it easy to build web APIs, that is HTTP-based services. So ASP.NET Web API is an ideal platform for building RESTful services on top of the .NET framework or even .NET Core. So these web services can be consumed by a variety of clients, such as browsers, mobile applications, desktop applications, and IoT. So most important thing to keep in mind is that we can develop both RESTful and non-RESTful web services using the ASP.NET API framework. But this framework is used to create RESTful services. In short, this framework does not provide any specific architectural style for creating the services. So, I've just mentioned IoTs. So IoT stands for Internet of Things, and it is actually a network of physical devices, buildings, vehicles, other items that are embedded with electronic sensors, softwares, actuators, and network connectivity that enable these objects to collect and actually exchange information or can save data. So in other words, we can say that Internet of Things are the objects or devices which should have an IP address and they can communicate with other internet-enabled devices. So what are REST? So we have just seen REST API. So REST in full stands for Representational State Transfer. This is actually an architectural pattern used for exchanging data over distributed environment. So in REST, there is something called client and server. And the data can be exchanged between the client and server over a distributed environment. So distributed environment means the client can be on any platform like Java, .NET, PHP, Python, and other languages. And the server can also be on any of the platform like Java, Python, .NET, and PHP. So the REST architectural pattern treats each service as a resource, and a client can access those resources by using a HTTP protocol methods such as the get, post, put, patch, and delete. So what are HTTP verbs or HTTP methods? These get, post, put, patch, and delete. What does it do? So the HTTP verbs or HTTP methods in RESTful services, the HTTP verbs identify what type of operation the service is going to perform. So when we talk about get method, so the get HTTP method is used to retrieve the data. So the HTTP get method requests a representation of the specified resource. So request using get should only be used to request data. So in case you want to retrieve data via an API, then you use a get method. So when we talk about post method, the post method request is used to make a new entry into the database. So this is used when we are creating data or posting data, or we want to create a new record. That is when we use a post method. So when we talk about put method, put is also one of the HTTP verb, and the put method is used to update all the properties of the current resource in the database. Assuming you want to update certain details of data in the database, then via an API, then you will use a put method to actually update those details. So the patch method is similar to put, but the only difference is that patch method is used to update a few properties of the resource in the database, assuming you want to update certain fields and not the entire record. So that is when you use the patch method. But put method, you update the entire record. Then we have the delete method. So the delete method is used to delete the resource from the database. So this is used in case you want to delete a record from the database. That is when you use the delete method. So now, what is the difference between REST and SOAP? So SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol, while REST, as we had indicated, stands for Representational State Transfer. So the SOAP is an XML-based protocol, while REST is not a protocol. Rather, it is an architectural pattern that is a resource-based architecture. So SOAP has specification for both stateless and stateful implementation, whereas REST is completely stateless. So SOAP enforces message format as XML, whereas REST does not enforce message format as XML or JSON. So another thing is that the SOAP message consists of an envelope that includes SOAP headers and a body to store the actual information. So whereas REST uses the HTTP built-in headers to store the information and uses the HTTP methods of verbs. That is the get, post, put, patch, and delete to perform CRUD operations. That is the creating, reading, updating, and deleting. So another thing very important is that SOAP performance is always slow as compared to REST. So you better develop REST APIs than SOAP. So what is the difference between ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web API? So ASP.NET MVC framework basically is used to create a web application following the MVC design pattern, that is the model, view, and controller. Then in ASP.NET MVC, the action method can return both data and view, either JSON or even a view. It only returns data in JSON format using the JSON result. So all requests are mapped to the respective action method based on the action method names. That is on the ASP.NET MVC. Also, the content negotiation is not supported. So in ASP.NET Web API, ASP.NET Web API framework is used to develop the RESTful services that can be consumed by different clients. That is the browsers, mobile applications, desktop apps, and even IoTs. Then we have ASP.NET Web API framework returns data in JSON, XML, or any other format based on the accept header in the request. So it does not return the view to the client. So that is the difference with the ASP.NET MVC. So all the requests are mapped to actions using HTTP verbs. So these HTTP verbs, as we had seen, it actually guides the operations that needs to be performed by the client. So content negotiation also is supported now on ASP.NET Web API. So that is it about Web API. So how do you create ASP.NET Web API application using Visual Studio? So I'll just launch my Visual Studio. So here it is. So I'll create a new project. Then on this other side, I'll choose ASP.NET Core Web API, then new. Then you actually provide the name of the API. I'll call Students API. So that is how you launch it. Then new. Then you are using .NET 6. Then this one we leave it as it is. Then create new. There we are. So our application has actually started. So if you open it, you will see it as a default controller. That is for weather forecasting. Then we have our program.cs file. Then we have our model that holds the data for weather forecasting. So if you just launch this API, you can see we have our API there. Let me expand this. So we have our API there, Students API with weather forecasting. So if you want to retry, you can just click there, then execute. Then you are able to see the data. So this is in JSON format, as you can see. So if you want to learn more about Web API connecting to SQL Server, please consider watching our previous videos about ASP.NET Web API. So that is it for our today's video, and remember to subscribe and like our videos for more updates and even notifications. Thank you.